If you want to know who a person really is, don't watch what they do when everyone is looking. Watch what they choose when they believe no one ever will. The lunch crowd at Hawthorne House in downtown Chicago moved with the polished rhythm of expensive habits. Crystal glasses caught the afternoon sunlight. Conversations floated beneath the soft notes of a jazz trio, and every table seemed occupied by people who believed schedules mattered more than seconds. Among them sat Ethan Caldwell, the 38-year-old billionaire founder of Caldwell Dynamics, a man whose reputation for testing people had become almost as famous as the technology empire he had built. Investors admired him. Competitors feared him. Employees respected him, though few ever understood what he was thinking. Across the room, Maya Brooks adjusted the sleeve of her neatly pressed black uniform before balancing another tray with practiced confidence. At 26, she had learned that invisible work demanded visible excellence. Every plate was perfectly aligned. Every glass landed without a sound. Every guest received the same calm smile regardless of whether they tipped generously or barely acknowledged she existed. Most customers noticed only the uniform. They never wondered why someone who carried herself with quiet confidence chose to spend evenings serving tables in one of Chicago's finest restaurants. They never asked why she always kept a weathered notebook tucked inside her locker or why she smiled whenever she heard someone speaking another language across the dining room. They simply assumed they already knew her story. Ethan watched from the corner of his eye as Maya greeted an elderly couple with genuine warmth before helping a nervous young father fold a stroller without interrupting the flow of service. Small choices, he thought. Interesting choices. His longtime attorney leaned closer and lowered his voice. Still doing your little social experiments? Ethan answered with the faintest smile. People reveal themselves when the reward is immediate and the audience is gone. Without another word, he removed a thick leather wallet from his jacket and placed it beside the dessert menu. It wasn't an accident. Inside rested several credit cards, nearly $4,000 in cash, and one handwritten note folded behind his business card. The attorney raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He had seen this before, though never in a restaurant this crowded. Ethan finished his coffee, stood naturally, thanked the staff, and walked toward the exit without glancing back. From the front windows, he could still see the dining room, though no one inside appeared to notice him watching. Minutes passed. Guests laughed. Servers crossed the polished floor. The wallet remained untouched beside the empty chair like a silent question waiting for someone to answer it. Maya eventually arrived carrying a tray of fresh coffee. She cleared the dishes one by one before her eyes settled on the forgotten wallet. She didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, she looked around the room, scanning nearby tables as though expecting the owner to return at any second. One server whispered, "Looks expensive." Another shrugged, "Manager will handle it." Maya gently picked it up with both hands, feeling its surprising weight. She could have walked straight to the office. She could have ignored it entirely. She could have opened it. Dozens of ordinary decisions suddenly stood before her, each leading somewhere different. Around her, the restaurant continued exactly as before, unaware that an unseen test had quietly begun. Outside, Ethan remained perfectly still behind the tinted window, convinced he already understood how this story would end. He had no idea that the choice waiting inside that wallet would challenge far more than Maya Brooks's integrity. Before sunset, the decision of one overlooked waitress would ripple far beyond a luxury restaurant, drawing strangers, local reporters, and an entire city into a conversation that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with character. And hidden inside the folded note was a question no one expected to answer, least of all the woman everyone had underestimated. Before we continue, if you enjoy unforgettable stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary moments, subscribe to Hidden Tables. Every story reminds us that true character is revealed through courage, compassion, and the choices we make when no one is watching. Now, let's see what happens next. Maya carried the wallet toward the manager's office with steady hands, but halfway across the dining room, she noticed something unusual. A folded corner of white paper was barely visible inside one of the card slots, almost as though it had been placed there to be discovered rather than hidden. She paused for only a heartbeat before looking away. Curiosity had whispered. Discipline answered first. She knocked softly on the office door, but no one responded. The lunch rush had pulled both managers onto the floor, leaving the office temporarily empty. Rather than setting the wallet down unattended, Maya slipped it into a locked lost and found drawer that required 2 employee keys to open, signed the logbook with the exact time, and returned to work without mentioning it to anyone. Outside, Ethan frowned slightly. That was not the reaction he usually saw. Most people either rushed to find the owner or could not resist opening the wallet. Maya had done neither. She had protected it first. His attorney folded his arms. Interesting. Ethan nodded but kept watching. Not finished. Back inside, another server named Kelly approached Maya while polishing silverware. Was there a lot of cash? She asked with a playful grin. Maya smiled politely. I never looked. Kelly laughed as though it were a joke. Come on. Everyone would look. Maya simply continued arranging clean glasses. Not everyone. The conversation ended there, but another pair of ears had been listening. An elderly gentleman dining alone near the window glanced up from his newspaper with quiet interest before returning to his meal. Less than 20 minutes later, the restaurant phone rang. The hostess answered, listened for several seconds, then hurried toward Maya. Someone says they lost a wallet. They are asking if we found one. Maya wiped her hands on a clean towel and walked to the front desk. The caller sounded calm, almost rehearsed. Can you confirm what was inside? Maya asked gently. There was a brief silence. Then the voice confidently listed several credit cards and described the leather color perfectly. Many people would have accepted that answer. Maya did not. Could you also tell me the handwritten message folded inside? Another silence followed, this one noticeably longer. Handwritten message? The caller replied. I do not remember one. Maya thanked the caller warmly. If you are the owner, we will be happy to return your property after verifying everything in person. She ended the call without revealing another detail. Across the street, Ethan slowly lowered the disposable phone he had borrowed from his driver. His attorney looked at him with an expression halfway between amusement and surprise. She expected someone to pretend it was theirs. Ethan said nothing for several moments. Very few people anticipated a second test, hidden inside the first. Meanwhile, the afternoon crowd began replacing the lunch guests. The restaurant settled into a quieter rhythm as sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor. During her short break, Maya finally returned to the office because both managers were now present. She unlocked the drawer, carefully placed the wallet on the desk, and explained everything, including the suspicious phone call. The general manager thanked her for documenting every step so precisely. As he reached for the wallet, a small photograph slipped onto the desk. Maya instinctively looked away before she could recognize the face. Respect, to her, meant protecting another person's privacy even when no one would know otherwise. The manager noticed that simple gesture and smiled quietly. Outside, Ethan watched through the window one final time before turning toward his waiting car. The experiment he believed would measure honesty had begun revealing something far more difficult to fake. Integrity was only the first layer. Wisdom, patience, and restraint were beginning to tell a much deeper story, one that neither he nor anyone else in the restaurant had expected to uncover before the day was over. The call should have ended the experiment, yet it lingered in Ethan's thoughts long after his car disappeared into afternoon traffic. He had expected honesty. He had not expected judgment. Most people protected valuables. Very few questioned the story attached to them. Maya had done both without seeking recognition, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Back inside Hawthorne House, the restaurant returned to its familiar rhythm. Fresh linens replaced used ones. Coffee filled porcelain cups. Quiet conversations drifted beneath polished chandeliers. Maya moved through every table with the same calm focus she had shown all afternoon, never once asking whether the owner had returned for the wallet or whether anyone had praised her decision. To her, the matter was unfinished business, not a personal victory. During a slower moment, the elderly gentleman who had been reading near the window asked for another cup of tea. As Maya carefully refilled his cup, he smiled kindly. Young lady, may I ask you something? She nodded. Why did you not simply look inside? Most people would have. Maya rested the teapot gently on the table. Because once I know something private about another person without permission, I cannot unknow it. Trust is easier to protect before it is broken. The gentleman's smile grew warmer. That is an unusual answer. She laughed softly. My grandmother used to say that character is what you protect, not what you display. The old man thanked her, but his thoughtful expression remained long after she walked away. Unbeknownst to Maya, he was a retired federal judge whose opinions had shaped countless legal decisions over 4 decades. He quietly wrote a few lines inside the notebook resting beside his teacup before closing it again. Later that afternoon, the general manager unlocked the office safe to verify the wallet's contents alongside Maya and another supervisor, following restaurant policy. Everything matched the inventory exactly. Cash, cards, business card, folded handwritten note. The manager carefully unfolded the note, expecting perhaps an emergency contact or personal reminder. Instead, he paused in silence before reading it again. If you are reading this without the owner's permission, the test is already over. The room became perfectly still. Maya lowered her eyes, relieved she had never opened the wallet herself. The manager slowly looked toward her. You passed before you even knew there was a test. She answered quietly. I was not trying to pass anything. He smiled. That is probably why you did. At nearly the same moment, Ethan received a phone call from the restaurant confirming that someone claiming ownership had failed the verification process but that the wallet remained secure. He thanked the manager and ended the call, then stared out the window of his office overlooking the Chicago River. His assistant entered carrying a folder of acquisition documents. Your board meeting starts in 15 minutes. Ethan barely glanced at the papers. Move it to tomorrow. She blinked in surprise. Postponing billion-dollar negotiations was something Ethan almost never did. Is everything all right? She asked. He answered honestly. I think I have been measuring the wrong things. Hundreds of employees believed they understood the man leading Caldwell Dynamics. They admired his discipline, his strategy, and his relentless standards. Almost none of them knew that years earlier, his father had lost a small family business because he trusted the wrong partner. Since then, Ethan had spent his entire career building systems to test people before believing them. Somewhere along the way, testing had quietly replaced trusting. As evening settled across Chicago, the city lights reflected against glass towers while Maya finished her shift exactly as she always did, unaware that her ordinary choices had already begun changing the perspective of a man whose decisions influenced thousands of lives. Neither of them realized that the folded note inside the wallet was only the first layer of a much larger question, one that would soon reveal a connection between Maya's hidden past and a problem inside Ethan's company that no executive had been able to solve. The next morning arrived wrapped in the cool breeze drifting off the Chicago River, and Hawthorne House awakened long before its first guests stepped through the front doors. Maya Brooks tied her apron with the same quiet precision she had every shift, greeting coworkers with a warm smile that never asked for attention. To everyone around her, yesterday had simply been another busy afternoon. The forgotten wallet had already become a small story passed between servers before breakfast orders pushed it aside. No one knew that the owner of that wallet had spent half the night rereading reports he suddenly realized measured performance far better than character. Ethan Caldwell stood inside the executive conference room at Caldwell Dynamics while the city's skyline stretched across the windows behind him. Quarterly reports covered the polished oak table, but his attention kept returning to a single question that refused to disappear. How many remarkable people had he overlooked because he had only measured credentials instead of judgment? His chief operating officer began reviewing hiring statistics, speaking confidently about elite universities and executive experience. Ethan interrupted with an unexpected question. How many of our employees came from community colleges? The room fell unusually quiet. Several executives searched through digital reports while others exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, someone answered. Less than 3%. Ethan nodded slowly, but said nothing more. The number lingered in the room long after the meeting moved forward. Meanwhile, Maya finished polishing silverware before opening her worn notebook during a 10-minute break. The pages were filled with handwritten observations, language exercises, customer service ideas, and carefully organized sketches of software interface concepts. She had carried that notebook for years, adding to it whenever inspiration appeared between tables. Across the top of a fresh page she wrote, "Trust is built through predictable choices." Beneath the sentence, she outlined a simple verification process that reduced fraud without making honest people feel distrusted. She smiled to herself before closing the notebook as another table requested service. It was not homework. It was simply how her mind worked. She enjoyed solving problems whether anyone noticed or not. Shortly after noon, the retired judge returned for lunch. This time he specifically requested Maya's section. As she poured iced tea into his glass, he asked gently, "Have you ever considered working somewhere besides a restaurant?" Maya laughed politely. "People ask me that sometimes." "And what do you tell them?" She glanced around the dining room before answering. "Every job teaches something. Right now this one teaches me how people make decisions when they think nobody important is watching." The judge smiled with quiet satisfaction. "That sounds like the answer of someone who studies people for a living." Maya shrugged. "I just pay attention." Before leaving, the judge handed the manager a business card and quietly requested that it be given to Maya after her shift. There was no explanation beyond a handwritten note on the back that read, "Never stop trusting your own judgment." At nearly the same hour, Ethan instructed his assistant to arrange a private dinner at Hawthorne House for the following evening. His assistant assumed it involved clients. Instead, Ethan added one unusual request. "Reserve the same table. And please do not tell the staff who requested it." She looked puzzled but agreed without question. As sunset painted the glass buildings in shades of gold, Maya unlocked her locker and noticed the business card waiting beside her notebook. She read the judge's brief message twice before carefully placing it between the notebook's pages. She had no idea that another invitation, far more unexpected than this one, was already being set into motion. Across the city, Ethan looked once more at the folded note he had placed inside the wallet before quietly folding it away again. Yesterday had begun as an experiment designed to evaluate honesty. Tomorrow, without either of them realizing it yet, would begin revealing something far more valuable than honesty alone. It would reveal the kind of wisdom that no resume, no interview, and no background check could ever fully capture. The following evening arrived with a gentle spring rain that polished the streets of downtown Chicago and painted reflections across the restaurant's tall front windows. Inside Hawthorne House, candles flickered against polished glass while soft piano music drifted through the dining room. Maya began her shift believing it would be another ordinary evening filled with familiar faces and quiet conversations. She had no reason to expect that yesterday's forgotten wallet would return in a completely different form. Just before 6 o'clock, the hostess approached with a discreet smile. "Table 12 requested you specifically." Maya glanced toward the corner dining area and immediately recognized the man who had walked away from the wallet. Ethan Caldwell sat alone this time, dressed no differently than the afternoon before, except that now his attention rested on the entrance instead of a business meeting. When Maya arrived at the table, she greeted him exactly as she greeted every guest. "Good evening, sir. Welcome back." Ethan looked up with a calm expression. "Good evening. Thank you for taking care of something very important yesterday." Maya nodded politely. "I am glad everything was returned safely." There was no pride in her voice, no expectation of praise, only simple professionalism. Ethan studied her reaction for a moment before asking, "Were you ever tempted to open it?" Maya answered without hesitation. "No, not even to make sure it belonged to the right person." She smiled gently. "There are ways to verify ownership without crossing someone else's privacy." Ethan leaned back slightly. "You expected someone to pretend it was theirs. It happens more often than people think," Maya replied. "Sometimes the safest way to protect honest people is to avoid giving dishonest people information they can use." Ethan felt the same quiet surprise he had experienced behind the restaurant window the day before. She was not merely honest. She understood systems. She thought several steps ahead. After placing his order, Maya returned to the kitchen while Ethan remained unusually thoughtful. His assistant had prepared pages of background information before he arrived. There had been no criminal record, no prestigious graduate degree, no famous awards. According to public records, Maya Brooks had attended a community college for 2 years before financial hardship forced her to leave. Since then, she had worked multiple jobs while helping support her grandmother until her passing 3 years earlier. On paper, her story appeared ordinary. Yet nothing about the woman serving his table felt ordinary anymore. Later in the evening, Ethan noticed Maya quietly helping a new employee who had accidentally entered an incorrect order into the point-of-sale system. She did not criticize. She simply showed the younger server a faster method before returning to her own tables without drawing attention to herself. Leadership, Ethan realized, often appeared long before a management title did. When dessert arrived, Ethan placed a folded sheet of paper beside his empty coffee cup. "Would you mind looking at something?" Maya hesitated before unfolding it. It contained a simple process diagram showing how customer identity was verified inside one of Ethan's companies. Several arrows connected approval steps that seemed unnecessarily complicated. She studied the page for only a few seconds before looking up. "May I ask one question?" Ethan nodded. "Why do you verify the customer after collecting information instead of before?" Ethan blinked. "Explain." Maya reached for a clean napkin and borrowed a pen from her apron. In less than a minute, she redrew the process using fewer steps while separating identity verification from transaction approval. If trust is established first, people spend less time repeating information, and employees have fewer chances to make mistakes. Ethan stared silently at the sketch. It was remarkably close to a redesign his senior consultants had spent 6 months unsuccessfully trying to create. Maya slid the napkin back across the table. "It is only an idea." Ethan looked at the elegant simplicity of the solution before lifting his eyes to meet hers again. For the first time since entering the restaurant, he was no longer seeing a waitress. He was seeing a mind that had been hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone curious enough to notice. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. The quiet between Maya Brooks and Ethan Caldwell carried more weight than the conversations filling every other table inside Hawthorne House. Ethan looked down at the neatly sketched diagram on the linen napkin, tracing each line with his eyes. There were no unnecessary arrows, no complicated language, no expensive consulting vocabulary, just a clean sequence of decisions that eliminated confusion before it had the chance to appear. It was elegant because it respected people instead of forcing them through layers of suspicion. Ethan slowly folded the napkin and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket as carefully as someone preserving an important contract. "Where did you learn to think like this?" he asked quietly. Maya smiled with a hint of embarrassment. "Mostly by watching people." Ethan waited for more. She continued while collecting an empty dessert plate. "Restaurants are systems. Airports are systems. Families are systems. Businesses are systems too. When something breaks, I usually ask which step made the next step harder." Ethan could not remember the last executive who had explained a complex problem in language that simple. Before he could respond, another guest requested assistance, and Maya excused herself with the same professional warmth she had shown everyone else that evening. She never lingered to impress anyone. She simply returned to work. Ethan remained seated long after finishing his coffee, watching something he had overlooked the previous day. Maya anticipated problems before they happened. She noticed when an elderly guest reached for a chair before quietly moving it closer. She brought a children's menu before young parents had to ask. She recognized a customer with a food allergy from a previous visit without needing to check the reservation notes. Every action reflected the same pattern. Observe carefully, solve quietly, move on without expecting applause. Across the dining room, the general manager approached Maya during a brief lull. "Table 12 has been here almost 2 hours, he whispered with a smile. "He seems unusually interested in customer service." Maya laughed softly. "Maybe he is just having a peaceful evening." The manager nodded, unaware of the conversation that had already taken place. As closing time approached, Ethan requested the check. Maya returned with the receipt folder and thanked him sincerely for visiting again. Instead of signing immediately, Ethan reached into his briefcase and removed a plain white envelope with no company logo or identifying marks. He slid it across the table. "Please read this after your shift." Maya looked at the envelope but did not touch it. "May I ask what it is?" Ethan answered honestly. "An invitation. Nothing more." She nodded respectfully and placed it beside the receipt without opening it. Ethan smiled almost to himself. 24 hours earlier, she had refused to open a stranger's wallet. Tonight, she refused to open an envelope until the appropriate moment. Consistency, he realized, was the rarest form of integrity. After Ethan left the restaurant, he instructed his driver to head directly to Caldwell Dynamics instead of home. Nearly every executive floor was empty by then, but one department still had lights glowing. The product development team was preparing another presentation about the company's identity verification platform, the same project that had consumed months of expensive research. Ethan quietly entered the conference room, carrying only the folded napkin. Without explaining where it came from, He placed it in the center of the table. Engineers, analysts, and senior designers leaned forward in curiosity. One by one, they studied the sketch. Finally, the lead architect broke the silence. Who designed this? Ethan looked through the glass wall toward the city lights stretching across Chicago before answering. Someone the world keeps overlooking. No one spoke again. The room suddenly felt different, as though years of assumptions had shifted by a few inches. Back at Hawthorne House, Maya finished wiping the final table before remembering the plain, white envelope waiting inside her locker. She sat alone in the quiet employee break room, carefully turning it over in her hands. There was no return address, no company name, only her name written neatly across the front. She took a slow breath, opened the envelope at last, and unfolded a single sheet of paper. As her eyes moved across the first sentence, her expression changed from polite curiosity to complete disbelief, because the invitation inside was not offering her a reward. It was offering her an opportunity that would force her to choose between the life she had built with quiet dignity and a future she had never allowed herself to imagine. Maya read the letter twice before allowing herself to believe the words were real. Ethan Caldwell was inviting her to spend one day at Caldwell Dynamics as an independent observer, not as a job applicant, not as a consultant, and certainly not as a publicity event. The invitation explained only one purpose. He wanted her honest perspective on how ordinary people experience systems designed by extraordinary professionals. Transportation would be provided. There would be no interviews and no obligation to accept anything afterward. Maya carefully folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. She did not celebrate. She did not call anyone. Instead, she quietly placed the envelope inside her weathered notebook and locked her locker before walking into the cool Chicago evening. During the train ride home, city lights reflected against the windows while commuters scrolled through phones or stared silently into the distance. Maya opened her notebook to the page where she had written, "Trust is built through predictable choices." Beneath it, she added another sentence. "Opportunity should never change your principles." She closed the notebook with a thoughtful smile. The next morning, Caldwell Dynamics buzzed with unusual energy. Executives hurried between conference rooms carrying tablets and financial reports, unaware that the person who had redesigned one of their most frustrating workflows using a restaurant napkin would soon walk through the front entrance. Ethan arrived early and instructed every department head with one simple rule. Treat today's guest exactly as you would treat any visitor. Do not tell anyone why she is here. Some executives exchanged puzzled looks, but no one questioned him. Shortly before 9 o'clock, Maya stepped into the bright glass lobby wearing a simple navy blazer over a white blouse, professional but understated. She carried no expensive briefcase, only the same notebook that had traveled with her for years. The receptionist greeted her warmly before notifying Ethan's assistant. While she waited, two junior analysts standing nearby glanced at her uniform-free appearance and quietly assumed she must be interviewing for an administrative position. One whispered, "She looks nervous." The other shrugged, "Probably another support candidate." Maya heard neither comment because she was studying the visitor directory displayed on a digital screen. Within seconds, she noticed that the building map required 6 separate selections just to locate a conference room. She smiled to herself and made a quick note inside her notebook. Too many steps before value appears. Moments later, Ethan entered the lobby personally, extending a welcoming hand. Several employees looked up in surprise. Their chief executive rarely greeted visitors himself. Ethan thanked Maya for accepting the invitation and escorted her through the building without introducing her title because, in truth, she did not have one. That made the reactions around them even more revealing. Some employees smiled naturally. Others barely acknowledged her presence, assuming she could not possibly be important. Maya noticed every interaction but never commented. As they reached the product development floor, Ethan stopped outside the conference room where his senior engineers were already gathered. The folded restaurant napkin rested in the center of the polished table like an ordinary piece of paper carrying extraordinary consequences. Ethan looked toward Maya with genuine respect. "Everything that happens today begins because you chose not to open a wallet." Maya answered softly, "I think it began because someone finally decided to ask a different question." Ethan smiled. For the first time in years, he realized leadership was not about having every answer. Sometimes it was about recognizing wisdom in places the world had stopped looking. Together, they stepped into the conference room, unaware that within the next hour, one quiet observation from Maya would challenge assumptions that had guided an entire billion-dollar company for years. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories where the most overlooked people reveal the greatest strength, subscribe to Hidden Tables. Here, every story reminds us that courage, integrity, and kindness can come from the most unexpected places. Now, let's see what happened next. The conference room overlooked the Chicago skyline, but no one inside seemed interested in the view anymore. Every eye rested on the folded napkin lying in the center of the polished table and on the quiet woman standing beside Ethan Caldwell. Around the room sat senior engineers, product managers, cybersecurity specialists, and executives whose combined experience stretched across decades. They had spent months debating improvements to the company's identity verification platform. Maya Brooks had spent less than 1 minute drawing an alternative with a borrowed pen. Ethan invited everyone to continue exactly as planned. "Pretend I am not here," Maya said with a polite smile. "I am only here to observe." The lead engineer began presenting a detailed slideshow filled with diagrams, performance metrics, and technical terminology. Maya listened carefully without interrupting. She wrote short notes inside her notebook instead of reacting immediately. After nearly 40 minutes, Ethan finally turned toward her. "You have been very quiet." Maya closed her notebook gently. "I wanted to understand your goals before commenting on your methods." One executive leaned forward with obvious curiosity. "And what do you think?" Maya hesitated respectfully. "May I ask everyone one question first?" Ethan nodded. "Please." She looked around the room. "How many of you have personally completed the customer verification process exactly the way a first-time customer experiences it?" The room became unexpectedly silent. Several people exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, one manager admitted, "We usually test individual sections, not the entire experience." Maya smiled kindly. "That explains why your numbers and your customers are telling different stories." No one appeared offended. Instead, curiosity slowly replaced confidence. Maya stood and walked toward the large display screen. She did not erase a single diagram. Instead, she drew a simple line beneath the existing workflow. "Every additional decision asks customers to trust you before you have shown them that you deserve their trust," she explained. People become uncertain when they have to repeat information because repetition feels like doubt. Doubt creates hesitation. Hesitation creates abandoned applications. The marketing director quietly whispered, "Our abandonment rate has increased for almost a year." Maya nodded gently. "Your software is solving security problems very well. It is creating relationship problems at the same time." Ethan noticed something remarkable. Nobody interrupted her. Nobody challenged her credentials. They challenged only her ideas, exactly as thoughtful professionals should. The discussion became energetic rather than defensive. Engineers asked questions. Designers sketched alternatives. Analysts compared customer feedback with Maya's observations. For the first time in months, departments that usually defended their own work were collaborating around a shared purpose instead of competing for recognition. During a short coffee break, one young software developer approached Maya. "Can I ask where you studied user experience design?" Maya laughed softly. "Mostly restaurant dining rooms." He smiled, assuming she was joking. She was not. She explained how years of watching guests search menus, hesitate during payment, ask repeated questions, and become frustrated by confusing procedures had taught her to recognize patterns that existed everywhere people interacted with systems. Whether someone ordered dinner or opened a financial account, the emotional journey often followed the same principles. The young developer stared at her notebook with newfound respect. "I never thought of it that way," Maya answered. "People rarely separate technology from feelings. They only separate departments." Later that afternoon, the project team quietly tested Maya's simplified sequence using archived customer simulations. The first results appeared on the conference room screen within minutes. Processing time decreased. Completion rates improved. Error reports dropped noticeably. No one cheered. The room became even quieter than before because every person understood what those numbers meant. Months of complicated solutions had overlooked an answer hidden inside ordinary human behavior. Ethan looked around the table and realized something that no financial report had ever taught him. Extraordinary insight does not always arrive wearing an executive title. Sometimes it arrives carrying a notebook worn smooth by years of careful observation, proving that wisdom belongs to those who never stop paying attention while everyone else is busy assuming. By late afternoon, the conference room no longer felt like the headquarters of a billion-dollar corporation. It felt like a classroom where every person, regardless of title, had become a student again. Engineers who had defended complex architectures only hours earlier were now simplifying diagrams with genuine excitement. Product managers compared customer interviews they had nearly forgotten with the observations Maya Brooks had written inside a notebook carried between restaurant tables. Ethan Caldwell remained unusually quiet, watching a transformation that spreadsheets could never measure. It was not only the software that was changing. The people designing it were changing as well. One senior executive finally leaned back in his chair and smiled. I think we spent too much time asking what our system could do and not enough time asking how it made people feel. Maya nodded gently. People remember how difficult something felt long after they forget how advanced it was. The sentence settled over the room like a truth everyone had somehow overlooked. Ethan turned toward the customer experience director. How many complaints have we categorized as user error during the past year? The director opened a dashboard on her laptop and hesitated before answering. Almost 68%. Ethan folded his hands together. How many of those might actually be design errors? No one responded immediately. Silence had become more valuable than quick answers. It meant people were thinking instead of defending themselves. During another short break, Maya wandered into the employee cafe overlooking the river. She poured herself a cup of coffee and stood quietly by the window, admiring boats moving slowly across the water. A young receptionist recognized her from the lobby that morning and approached with a friendly smile. "Can I ask you something?" Maya nodded. "Of course. Were you always this confident?" Maya laughed softly. "Not at all. I simply became more comfortable admitting when I did not know something. Ironically, that helped me notice what everyone else was missing." The receptionist smiled thoughtfully before thanking her. Their conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Yet another employee standing nearby quietly typed the sentence into his phone because it was exactly what he needed to hear. Back inside the conference room, the development team had already implemented a prototype based on Maya's suggestions. Fresh testing data appeared across the large display. Customer completion time improved by nearly 20%. Verification accuracy remained just as strong. Satisfaction scores from simulated participants increased beyond every previous benchmark. Someone whispered, "That cannot be right." Another analyst reran the calculations manually. The results remained exactly the same. Ethan looked toward Maya. "You solved a problem we have been chasing for almost 8 months. Maya shook her head gently. "No, your team solved it. I only asked different questions." That answer impressed Ethan even more than the solution itself. She accepted no credit that belonged to others. She elevated the entire room instead of herself. Leadership, he realized again, often sounded remarkably humble. As the afternoon drew to a close, Ethan walked Maya through several departments before escorting her toward the lobby. Employees who had barely noticed her arrival that morning now smiled warmly as she passed. Some thanked her for her ideas. Others asked if she would visit again. Maya answered every conversation with the same quiet sincerity. Nothing about her demeanor had changed because recognition had never been her goal. Just before reaching the exit, Ethan paused beside the reception desk where their journey had begun. "I owe you an apology," he said honestly. Maya looked surprised. "For what?" Ethan smiled thoughtfully. "I believed I was testing your character. In reality, your character ended up testing mine. I have spent years building systems designed to measure trust while slowly forgetting how to extend it." Maya considered his words before replying. "Sometimes we protect ourselves so carefully that we accidentally build walls instead of bridges." Ethan looked toward the busy lobby where employees continued walking past, unaware that one simple conversation had quietly reshaped the future of their company. In that moment, he made a decision that would surprise not only Maya, but every executive inside Caldwell Dynamics. Because the greatest investment he would announce the following morning would not involve new technology, another acquisition, or a multi-million-dollar contract. It would involve believing in someone the world had overlooked for far too long. The next morning, The executive boardroom at Caldwell Dynamics filled earlier than usual. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the first light of a Chicago sunrise while directors reviewed agendas that looked routine on paper but felt unusually uncertain in the room. Rumors had already begun circulating through the building. Something significant had happened during the previous day's product review, yet almost no one knew the details. Ethan Caldwell entered without his usual stack of reports. Instead, he carried only Maya Brooks's notebook, which she had accidentally left behind in the conference room before one of his assistants safely secured it overnight. He placed it gently on the table without opening it. "Before we begin," he said calmly, "I want to tell you a story." Every conversation stopped. Ethan described a forgotten wallet, a waitress who refused to violate another person's privacy, a phone call designed to test honesty, and a simple drawing on a restaurant napkin that solved a problem experts had struggled with for months. He never exaggerated. He simply explained exactly what had happened. Some board members smiled politely at first, assuming there was a motivational lesson coming. Their expressions changed when the engineering director displayed the latest performance results. The redesigned workflow had reduced customer abandonment, improved completion rates, and maintained the company's security standards. Every improvement had been independently verified overnight. One director adjusted his glasses and quietly asked, "Who is this consultant?" Ethan answered with a faint smile. "She is not a consultant." Another executive looked confused. "Then which university recruited her?" Ethan shook his head. "No university recruited her. She has been serving customers in a restaurant while teaching herself by observing how people think, hesitate, trust, and decide." Silence settled over the room once again. It was the kind of silence that appears when assumptions begin collapsing under the weight of evidence. One senior board member finally spoke. "If everything you are showing us is accurate, then our hiring process would never have discovered someone like her." Ethan nodded. "Exactly. That is not her failure. It is ours." The words landed with unusual force because everyone around the table knew they were true. For years, Caldwell Dynamics had celebrated innovation while quietly filtering out unconventional thinkers before they ever reached an interview. The company's systems rewarded polished resumes, prestigious degrees, and familiar career paths. They had become exceptionally skilled at recognizing traditional excellence while overlooking extraordinary potential. Ethan walked toward the large display screen and replaced the hiring dashboard with a blank slide containing only one sentence. "We do not lack talent. We sometimes fail to recognize it." Nobody objected. Nobody defended the existing process. The previous day's events had made excuses feel unnecessary. After the meeting concluded, Ethan requested that Maya return later that afternoon, not for another observation session, but for a conversation. When Maya arrived, she expected to collect her notebook and thank everyone for the opportunity. Instead, she found several department leaders waiting to greet her warmly. Ethan handed her the notebook with a grateful smile. "You left something valuable yesterday." Maya accepted it carefully. "Thank you for keeping it safe." Ethan looked at the executives standing nearby before turning back to her. "You once told me that opportunity should never change your principles." Maya looked surprised. "You read that?" Ethan shook his head immediately. "No, I saw those words yesterday when you briefly opened the notebook during our discussion. I remembered them because they reminded me of something I needed to learn." Maya smiled with quiet relief. Trust, once again, had been respected. Ethan then offered her a chair at the conference table, not across from the executives, but beside them. It was a small gesture, almost invisible to anyone walking past the glass walls. Yet everyone inside the room understood exactly what it meant. The woman who had entered the building as an unknown visitor was no longer being invited to observe the conversation. She was being invited to help shape it. The room remained quiet for several moments after Maya Brooks took her seat beside the executives instead of across from them. It was a subtle difference, but everyone understood its meaning. Respect had replaced assumption. Ethan Caldwell looked around the table before speaking. "I did not invite Maya here because she agrees with us. I invited her because she notices what we miss." No one argued. Instead, the chief technology officer smiled and slid a printed proposal across the table. "Would you mind reviewing one more process?" Maya accepted the document with both hands, taking a few moments to read every page before saying a single word. The proposal described a new customer onboarding system that relied heavily on automation. The technical design was impressive. The security standards exceeded industry expectations. Yet something about it felt incomplete. Maya finally looked up. "May I ask a question?" Ethan nodded immediately. "Always." She pointed toward the final page. "Where does the customer learn why you are asking for all of this information?" Several executives glanced back through the document. No one answered because the explanation did not exist. Maya continued gently. "People are usually willing to cooperate when they understand the reason behind a request. Without context, every question feels like another obstacle." The customer experience director quietly leaned forward. "We spent months improving the software. We never thought about improving the explanation." Maya smiled. "People forgive complexity much more easily than confusion." A marketing executive immediately scribbled the sentence into his notebook. Another product manager nodded slowly, as if a puzzle had finally come together. Ethan watched the discussion unfold with quiet satisfaction. The conversation no longer revolved around proving who was smartest. It revolved around discovering what was true. That single change in culture felt more valuable than any software update. Later that afternoon, Ethan invited Maya to tour the innovation lab where prototypes of future products were being developed. Engineers demonstrated artificial intelligence systems, biometric authentication tools, and advanced customer support platforms. Maya listened carefully to every presentation before asking remarkably simple questions. How would this help an elderly customer? Could someone using this for the first time understand it without instructions? What happens if the internet connection fails? None of the questions were highly technical, yet each one exposed situations the teams had not fully considered. The engineers responded with growing enthusiasm instead of embarrassment. They realized she was strengthening their work rather than criticizing it. During the tour, one senior engineer quietly admitted, "I have spent 15 years designing software, but today reminded me that I should spend more time watching the people who actually use it." Maya answered with her usual humility. Technology succeeds when it makes people feel capable instead of intimidated. Before leaving the lab, Ethan stopped beside a large wall displaying the company's mission statement. It spoke about innovation, excellence, and leadership. He studied the words for several seconds before turning toward the communications director. "Add one more value." She looked up from her tablet. "Which one?" Ethan smiled as he looked toward Maya. "Curiosity. We cannot discover hidden talent if we stop asking unexpected questions." That evening, as employees prepared to leave for the day, conversations about Maya spread naturally throughout the building. Yet they were not discussing a dramatic confrontation or an extraordinary display of genius. They were talking about someone who listened carefully, respected others, and asked thoughtful questions that made everyone else think differently. Ethan realized that was exactly why her influence had become so powerful. She had not changed the company by demanding attention. She had changed it by helping people notice what had been standing in front of them all along. As Maya gathered her notebook and prepared to return to her ordinary life at Hawthorne House, she still believed the most important lesson from the past few days belonged to Ethan. She had no idea that the decision he was preparing to announce the following morning would transform not only her future, but the future of every talented person who had ever been quietly overlooked because their potential did not fit inside a traditional resume. The following morning, employees gathered inside the main auditorium at Caldwell Dynamics for what everyone assumed would be another quarterly company meeting. Large presentation screens glowed softly beneath the bright lights, while conversations filled the room with quiet anticipation. Engineers sat beside designers. Customer service representatives shared tables with executives. It was one of the few moments each year when every department occupied the same space. Maya Brooks almost declined the invitation. She believed the previous day's visit had already been more than generous, and she certainly did not expect to stand in front of hundreds of professionals. She quietly took a seat near the back of the room, hoping simply to observe. Ethan Caldwell stepped onto the stage carrying no presentation remote, no financial report, and no carefully rehearsed speech. Instead, he held a familiar brown leather wallet in one hand and a folded restaurant napkin in the other. The audience exchanged puzzled looks. Ethan waited until the room became completely silent before speaking. "A few days ago, I believed these two ordinary objects would help me measure another person's character. Instead, They exposed the limits of my own thinking. Every I focused on the stage. Ethan calmly described how the forgotten wallet had been returned without its privacy being violated, how a simple conversation had challenged assumptions inside his company, and how a woman working evening shifts at a restaurant had helped solve a problem that expensive research teams had struggled with for months. He never used dramatic language. He never exaggerated her achievements. He simply honored the truth. Then he looked toward the back of the auditorium. Maya, would you please join me? Hundreds of heads turned as Maya slowly stood, visibly surprised. She walked toward the stage with the same calm posture she had carried between restaurant tables, receiving polite applause that gradually grew into something warmer and more sincere. When she reached the stage, Ethan handed her the wallet. Please keep this for a moment, he said with a smile. Maya accepted it, remembering the first time she had carefully protected it without opening it. Ethan then lifted the folded napkin. This sketch reminded me that wisdom is not determined by job titles, educational prestige, or office location. It is revealed through observation, humility, and the courage to ask better questions. The audience responded with another round of applause. Ethan continued, beginning today, Caldwell Dynamics will launch a new initiative called Hidden Potential. Every employee, regardless of role or educational background, may submit ideas directly for evaluation. Contributions will be judged by the strength of the idea, not the status of the person presenting it. The announcement drew immediate excitement throughout the auditorium. Managers looked at one another with genuine optimism. Young employees who had quietly carried notebooks filled with ideas suddenly imagined possibilities they had never considered before. Ethan turned toward Maya once more. I would also like to offer you a position as Strategic Customer Insight Advisor. This is not because you solved one problem. It is because you reminded us how to see people before judging resumes. The room fell silent again as everyone waited for her response. Maya smiled gratefully before speaking into the microphone. Thank you for believing in me. But if I accept, I would like one promise. Ethan nodded. Name it. Maya looked across the audience. Do not let this become a story about one waitress. Let it become a story about every person whose ideas have been waiting for someone willing to listen. The auditorium erupted into its loudest applause of the morning. Ethan extended his hand, not as a billionaire welcoming an employee, but as one professional recognizing another. Maya accepted the handshake with quiet confidence, knowing the greatest reward was never the position itself. It was the possibility that countless unseen voices might finally receive the opportunity they had always deserved because one forgotten wallet had started a conversation that ended by changing an entire company's definition of talent. Several months passed, and the story that began with a forgotten wallet quietly spread far beyond the walls of Caldwell Dynamics. It was never announced as a publicity campaign. There were no dramatic advertisements or carefully staged interviews. Instead, the changes revealed themselves through ordinary moments. Customer satisfaction reached record highs because products had become easier to understand instead of simply more advanced. Employees from departments that had rarely been heard before began submitting thoughtful ideas through the Hidden Potential Initiative. A maintenance technician suggested a scheduling improvement that reduced equipment downtime across multiple offices. A receptionist redesigned the visitor check-in experience after noticing how frequently guests became confused. A customer support representative proposed a simpler onboarding guide that reduced call volume while increasing customer confidence. None of those ideas came from corner offices. They came from people who had always been capable but had finally been invited to contribute. Maya Brooks accepted her new position with the same humility that had defined every step of her journey. 3 mornings each week, she worked inside Caldwell Dynamics, collaborating with engineers, designers, and customer experience teams. 2 evenings each week, she continued serving at Hawthorne House by choice, not because she needed the income, but because she believed the restaurant remained one of the best classrooms she had ever known. Every guest carried a story. Every conversation revealed another lesson about patience, trust, and human behavior. When curious coworkers asked why she still wore an apron after joining one of the city's most respected technology companies, Maya always smiled before answering. If I stop listening to ordinary people, I will stop understanding who we are building for. Ethan Caldwell found himself changing in ways that surprised even those closest to him. He spent less time asking whether someone deserved an opportunity and more time asking whether the company had created enough opportunities to discover hidden talent. Hiring managers received new training that emphasized curiosity alongside qualifications. Interview panels began including practical problem-solving exercises instead of relying only on resumes and credentials. Promotion discussions expanded beyond titles to include observation, empathy, and thoughtful judgment. The culture shifted gradually, not because employees were forced to change, but because they saw leaders living the values they now discussed. One afternoon, nearly a year after the forgotten wallet had first rested on a restaurant table, Ethan returned alone to Hawthorne House. He requested the same corner seat where everything had quietly begun. Maya recognized him immediately and walked over carrying a glass of water with the same warm smile she had offered every customer long before either of their lives had changed. Ethan placed the old leather wallet on the table between them. "I still carry it," he admitted. Maya laughed softly. "As a reminder?" Ethan nodded. "Every time I see it, I remember that I almost measured another person's worth with a test instead of discovering it through trust." Maya looked at the familiar wallet for a moment before gently sliding it back toward him. "Perhaps the wallet never tested anyone," she said. "Perhaps it simply revealed what was already there." Ethan smiled because he knew she was right. The wallet had not created integrity. It had uncovered it. It had not created wisdom. It had revealed where wisdom had quietly existed all along. As the afternoon sunlight filled the restaurant, guests continued laughing over lunch. Servers moved gracefully between tables, and life carried on without realizing that one ordinary corner booth had become the birthplace of an extraordinary lesson. Some people believed greatness announced itself with applause, wealth, or influence. But the truth was far quieter. Sometimes greatness looked like respecting another person's privacy when no one was watching. Sometimes it sounded like asking one thoughtful question instead of making one quick assumption. And sometimes the most valuable person in the room was the one everyone had almost overlooked. Because in the end, power could open doors, money could build companies, and titles could command attention. But only character could change hearts. And on that quiet afternoon in Chicago, both a billionaire and a waitress discovered that the strongest bridge between people is built not with status, but with trust. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Hidden Table and join a community that believes true character is revealed not by power or status, but by courage, integrity, and kindness. Thank you for watching. And until next time, we'll save you a seat at the Hidden Tables.